So what do you think the metaphor buys you? I mean, you're a biologically oriented thinker. You talk about ideas in some sense as if they're analogous to life forms.
Yes.
And so let's explore that metaphor a little bit. What do you think
Sure.
that buys you in terms of explanatory power?
Well, what it does is it contextualizes uh, the fact that many people slowly walk into the abyss of infinite lunacy in complete complicity. So let me give you a couple of analogies, because again, in part it's just prose that allows me to draw a powerful analogy, but I actually do think that there are literal comparisons in using those biological metaphors. So take, for example, the spider wasp. The spider wasp looks for a spider to sting, rendering it zombified. It's still alive. It then carries this much larger spider into its burrow. And then while the spider is fully alive but zombified, it lays an egg, and then the offspring will eat the spider in vivo. Well, I argue that political correctness is akin to the spider wasp's sting, right? It zombifies us into being complicit in our silence, leading us slowly into the burrow of infinite lunacy. So you could view it as just powerful writing rhetoric, or literally the equivalent, a memetic form equivalent of what happens in biological systems. Now, when I talk, for example, about parasitic ideas, well, in neuroparasitology, what you typically study is how a particular parasite will end up making its way to the brain of its host, altering its neural circuitry, so that then the host will engage in behaviors that are maladaptive to it, but adaptive for the parasite. And so when I was trying to come up with a powerful way of explaining why do people hold on and get infected by these alluring parasitic ideas, I thought, aha, the neuroparasitological framework is the ideal framework to try to explain why otherwise supposedly rational people could completely become parasitized by insanity, right? Why it would be that the LGBTQ community could suddenly become in favor of Queers for Palestine, as that this is an actual group. So it's Queers for Palestine, but down Zionist pigs. So Tel Aviv is one of the most welcoming spots for the LGBTQ community. And so if I'm a member of that community, it would make rational sense for me to be supporting a system, a political system, a country where I could live in safety and freedom. But instead, I walk around saying Queers for Palestine. That sounds parasitic. It sounds like the idea, the framework that would cause me to say Queers for Palestine rather than yeah Tel Aviv is not a good position to hold, because as someone who comes from the Middle East, I can tell you that LGBT community in Gaza or the West Bank are not usually embraced with infinite warmth. So this is why I thought that using a neuroparasitological model would be really apt in describing why we become so intoxicated with these bad ideas.
Okay, so a parasite takes over a host so that the parasite can replicate. So it has an interest in the outcome, so to speak, or it acts like it has an interest in the outcome. That might be a more accurate way of thinking about it. So in order for that parasite metaphor to hold true, the ideas which are acting as parasites would have to have an interest in the outcome. So are you presupposing that ideas, I guess you're presupposing, like Dawkins, that ideas compete in a Darwinian fashion, and those that are the best at taking over their hosts are the ones that propagate?
The difference between, and of course I cite Dawkins' work,
yes,
in memetic stuff. The difference between, say, a memetic approach and the approach that I take in the book is I guess, twofold. One, memes can be negatively valenced. they could be neutral, and they can be positively valenced, right? So memes, a jingle. If I start humming a jingle and you happen to hear me, humming that jingle, Jordan, then you might hum it as well. And so my memetic jingle has now infected your brain. So that could be a completely neutral meme, or it could be a positive meme. So first, the valence of memes can be, all possible options. Whereas the parasitic idea pathogens that I'm speaking of, I'm implicitly, if not explicitly, stating that they are negative. That's one. Number two, the memetic framework operates as though they're viral, whereas there's a unique element to it being parasitic, right? So pathogens can be viruses, they could be bacteria, they could be parasites, they could be fungi. And so the reason why I call them idea pathogens is because pathogen is a broader term that can incorporate viral infection or parasitic infestation. So there are a few of these types of nuances between the approach that I'm taking and the one that Dawkins took so many years ago.
So a parasite tends to make a host act in ways that aren't that good for the host.
Exactly.
And it seems to me that that's potentially where the metaphor breaks down here, because it also seems to me that people who are pushing these ideas forward, or who are allowing themselves to become possessed by them, which is a metaphor I've used, actually gain as a consequence. So they're working for the same purposes as the parasite. And so then you have to wonder if that actually constitutes a parasite. I mean, the people who are pushing a given ideological position, or even a given theoretical position, hypothetically benefit from pushing that position as a consequence of the effects it has on their success within their broad community.
Sorry, if I may interrupt. No, I think I would look at it as, does the parasitizing of your mind result in the proliferation of the idea pathogen? The idea pathogen doesn't care about, your reproductive fitness. So, for example, take Islamophobia. If now I'm speaking as a, Islamic supremacist. If I want my society to become more Islamic, or not my society, the West to be more Islamic, spreading Islamophobia as a narrative is certainly very good. So if I could convince a lot of people in intelligentsia, in the humanities and the social sciences, that it is Islamophobic to ever criticize anything about Islam. So if the Islamophobia memeplex, to use Dawkins' term, or I would call it more of an idea pathogen, if I can parasitize enough minds to repeat this, then that is Islamophobia memeplex, by its spreading from brain to brain, has an ultimate goal of creating greater Islamization of the West. I don't care about the reproductive fitness of the humanities professor who is spreading that Islamophobia idea pathogen. Do you follow what I mean? So yeah,
well, but it might be to your benefit if you actually did enhance the function of your host.
If by being parasitized by the idea pathogen, it improves the reproductive fitness of the host?
Yes. Or in this situation, maybe the ideological or the academic status of the host, because then the ideas could be spread more rapidly.
That it certainly does, right? So if we can create an echo chamber where we could then spread that idea pathogen more readily, as happens in the academic ecosystem, that's perfect. But the reality is, the reason why I like the term parasitic rather than memetic is because by having, so go back to the example of Queers for Palestine, by having someone from the LGBT community fighting hard against Islamophobia and fighting hard against the Zionist pigs and so on, it is actually detrimental to my reproductive fitness. I mean, or never mind my reproductive fitness, my survival, right? Being someone who is a member of the LGBT community and standing up for a system that would be brutal in repressing me is not exactly a good rational strategy to pursue, and yet I pursue it precisely because I have been infected by a parasitic idea pathogen. You follow what I'm saying?
All right. Well, I follow it, but it doesn't explain to me exactly the motivation for putting the idea forward. Because the idea isn't literally hijacking the nervous system of its host in the same way that the parasitic wasp that you described hijacks the nervous system of the spider. Like there's no direct
Well, there is.
connection between the ideas and the motivations of the host. And so I guess that's partly, I'm striving to understand that.
Yeah, so, I mean, in the sense that the parasitic wasp is actually causing a neuronal alteration, a direct neuronal alteration that causes the spider to become zombified, you're right. But ultimately, not to be too reductionist, ultimately everything that we do, including our ideas, could be translated to neuronal firings, right?
Right, but you have to, hopefully you'd be able to specify that mechanism. So that leads to, well, I mean, I'm not suggesting that you should have pushed your research to the point where you could specify the neural mechanisms, but it does open up a problem